It's day 9 of Joseph Mann's expedition into the extreme wilderness of Antarctica. He's been following the tracks of a mysterious creature, a massive, anomalous beast that has been spotted in the snowy wastes. As he follows the tracks, he sees something. It's his own tent, but he had been walking for days after leaving this camp. How was he back here after only a few hours? Time and distance were starting to feel off, like they were stretched out and folded over into knots. Maybe he was confused about the tracks. Maybe he hadn't been chasing after something, but following the tracks of something that had been chasing him. Maybe he was wrong about everything. Hi, I'm Dr. Bob, and this is SCP-2764, also known as the Eldritch Antarctic. SCP-2764 is a massive biological entity, standing over 380 meters tall and estimated to weigh over 150,000 metric tons. It possesses around 80 tentacle-like arms that it uses for movement and simple actions like grasping objects. It also has what looks to be a head with 4 eyes. SCP-2764 possesses a number of anomalous properties, including the ability to communicate telepathically with humans, though the language used changes based on the person who is receiving its messages. Strangely, this communication appears to go one way only, as it has never demonstrated that it understands any attempts to communicate back to it. Its physical state has also been observed to be quite anomalous. Its size does not follow normal Euclidean geometry, with the creature appearing many times larger or smaller than it should, based on the viewer's distance from SCP-2764. There appears to be a critical zone lying roughly 50 kilometers away from the creature that stretches around it in a circle. As you move away from the creature and approach this line, SCP-2764 actually appears to grow larger until the critical zone is passed, at which point it begins to shrink as you move farther and farther away. Its body has a number of other strange properties too. Its tentacle-like arms rapidly translocate around its body at random intervals, jumping around all over its body, creating a twitchy, writhing mass that makes it impossible to count how many tentacles it actually possesses. But perhaps strangest of all is that not only do the creature's arms seem to break the laws of physics by jumping around its body, but so too does the entirety of SCP-2764. It's been observed to spontaneously relocate itself to different places, as if it is flickering in and out of existence. It appears that the creature flickers into a new place like this at random intervals, but it may be following some yet unknown rules, as it has never been seen appearing more than 25 kilometers away from where it was last seen, and always flickers back to its original location within 48 hours. SCP-2764 was first discovered by a civilian team.
The classic you want with the spice you need.
Was conducting detailed surveys of the Antarctic landscape. The team observed the creature and were immediately alarmed by its strange properties, especially its bizarre geometric qualities. They returned to their home base and described what they had seen to a colleague, who was actually an SCP Foundation researcher in charge of investigating anomalous activity in Antarctica. This researcher sent word back to his superiors, who activated Mobile Task Force Eta-5, also known as the Jaeger bombers. Eta-5 administered amnestics to the survey team and any other exposed civilians before setting up a perimeter around SCP-2764. What they would eventually learn was that the perimeter they established was far too close. In his investigation logs, MTF Eta-5 Commander Joseph Mann noted that he immediately experienced strange anomalous effects, such as how the creature seemed to shrink the closer he got to it, and the strange voices in his head. His curiosity soon got the better of him, and he decided to do some of his own research into the entity before the rest of the SCP Foundation scientists and guards arrived to take over the investigation. Mann gathered a couple volunteers who were also curious about the nature of the anomaly and set out on an expedition to gather more information. Just as they had experienced before, the more they walked towards the creature, the more it appeared to shrink in size. They also made note of strange prints in the snow. At first, they looked to be human prints, but then seemed to change into something that looked as if a squid had pulled itself onto the land and was dragging itself through the snow. After several days, the whole team was hearing voices. They also realized they had left their tissue analyzer back at a previous camp and would have to backtrack to retrieve it. As they moved away from the creature, they expected it to now increase in size, but it didn't. It stayed the same. Either something had changed about the anomaly, or SCP-2764 was moving towards them. After recovering the tissue analyzer, they continued on towards the creature again. Commander Mann began to understand the voices he was hearing and could even make out certain words like snow and back. Their perception of time was affected too. Hours seemed to stretch out or pass by in the blink of an eye. The voice he was hearing started to become more direct, and the message was clear: turn back. Mann was compelled to press on, though, even with the extremes of the Antarctic cold beginning to weigh on him. But then, SCP-2764 suddenly vanished, flickering out of existence, and the team was left with no choice but to follow the strange tentacle-like tracks in the snow, hoping they would lead to the creature. The tracks led them back to their old tent, the same one they had left the tissue analyzer at before, which should have been impossible based on the time and distance they had walked. Just then, Commander Mann realized that he had been wrong. They were the ones who had been pursued. They hadn't been following the tracks forward, but backwards to where they had been. Even worse, he realized that his team had disappeared. He was completely alone. Commander Mann continued to trudge through the snow, walking without direction, when he spotted SCP-2764 again. It was circling him, trying to maintain its distance, but he raced towards the creature and sliced off a piece of its flesh for analysis. Something strange happened when he placed it in the analyzer, though. The machine displayed a 0, which was the reading for human tissue. This strange result required further analysis from the Foundation researchers who should now have arrived to take over the investigation, so Mann began to make his way back in the direction of home. He spotted what looked to be members of his team off in the distance, and assumed that they must be on a mission to rescue him. Try as he might, though, the spatial anomalies prevented him from ever getting closer. It felt like it would take him an entire day just to walk a few feet. He assumed it must be the same for his rescuers as he watched them off in the distance, seeming to never get closer. At one point, he could even see as they stopped and turned back, appearing to return to an old campsite. He couldn't understand what they were doing, but then they disappeared entirely, only to reappear much closer to him. Commander Mann, now assured that there was something terribly wrong happening, tried to approach the now single rescuer he could see to tell him to turn back, but before he could, the man rushed at him with a knife and cut a piece of his flesh from his back. It's at that point that Commander Mann finally started to understand. He hadn't been watching a rescue team come for him. He'd been watching himself. He had been walking towards the creature, and yet, at the same time, he had also always been the creature. Commander Mann was trapped in a time loop where he was doomed to transform into the monstrous SCP-2764 and then watch himself meet the same fate over and over again, forever. The voices he had been hearing telling him to turn back were his own, words of warning that he was doomed to always ignore. SCP-2764 has been classified as Keter and is currently located in a classified area of Antarctica. A 150-kilometer radius has been established around the object, which is to be monitored at all times by Mobile Task Force Eta-5. Any civilians that come within the 150-kilometer radius, either by accident or due to SCP-2764 flickering to a populated area, are to be administered Class A amnestics, and any civilians that may have knowledge of the event are to be administered Class B amnestics. Should any civilian or Foundation employees come within 30 kilometers of SCP-2764, they are to be detained and immediately questioned. Following their psychological examination, and depending on the results of the evaluation, they will either be administered Class A amnestics or terminated.
It is the mid-19th century, in a village not far from St. Petersburg, Russia, where a sideshow carnival has been set up. There are a number of tents displaying various attractions, a man juggling fire in front of one. In another, a large bear balances on top of a ball. A detective from the St. Petersburg police force has been led here in the course of his investigation into the disappearance of a local chess prodigy's twin daughters. He had heard a rumor that the girls may be here, and he could easily imagine a kidnapping victim forced to perform as part of this seedy traveling circus. After passing by a contortionist and a man throwing knives at a woman strapped to a board, he found what he had been looking for: a large tent with a hand-painted sign reading, "The Samurai. See the unbeatable chess automaton." The detective had heard about these kinds of shows, and had even seen one himself. They would claim that their mechanical contraption could somehow play chess and beat even the best grandmasters without any human assistance. But the detective knew their secret. Inside was a person, cleverly hidden in such a way that you'd have no idea from the outside. But there was always someone in there, pulling on strings or levers to manipulate the machinery as the crowd looked on amazed at the feats technology was capable of. And who better to hide inside one of these charlatan boxes than a small girl who had already shown an incredible aptitude for chess? Two girls were even better than one. They could work together or take turns playing in shifts. The detective had the feeling in his gut that had yet to be wrong. The girls were in that machine. The detective enters the tent housing the automaton, but is stopped at the entrance and told that he has to pay if he wants to see. The smoky, lamplit tent is crowded with men all huddled around something in the center. A burst of cheers come from the throng, and again the man demands payment for entrance, poking the detective in the chest, telling him he has to pay or get out. The detective asks if he's the owner of the machine, but the man says he's just the exhibitor. He again stresses that the man has to pay or he'll be forced to leave, again punctuating his point with a stern poke to the chest. As the man pokes the detective again, though, the detective grabs his hand and twists his arm behind his back. He asks again who the owner of the machine is, but the exhibitor, through gritted teeth, tells him he really doesn't know. He only communicates through letters and doesn't know the owner's real name, or even what he looks like. The detective shoves the man aside and heads deeper into the tent. He enters the crowd of men, pushing them aside, and finally sees what everyone has been so amazed by. There in the middle of the room is a chessboard on top of a steel table connected to a small steam engine. Sitting next to the table is a stationary suit of samurai armor, and across from that is a Russian man who appears to be deep in thought. He is playing chess, and his game against the samurai does not look to be going well. The detective sees the man make his move, and then, almost instantaneously, a piece moves by itself across the board in response. The man buries his head in his hands. Checkmate. The crowd erupts in cheers as the detective makes his way to the table. The exhibitor is rushing towards him, trying to stop the detective as he inspects the samurai suit. The suit falls to the ground. It's empty. The exhibitor is pulling on the detective, pleading with him to leave. The detective knows the girls are in here, though. If not in the suit of armor, then under the table itself. The detective grabs the chessboard and pulls. To his surprise, it comes off easily. And underneath is machinery. A complicated series of tubes, magnets, and gears whir and hum with electric current. The detective can hardly comprehend what he's looking at until he spots it. There in the middle of the machinery are two glass jars, connected to the rest of the device by wires. There's a pink blob of organic material in each jar. Brain matter, and they are labeled with the missing girls' names. This is SCP-1875, also known as the Antique Chess Computer. SCP-1875 is a chess automaton from the Victorian period that is made up of four main components. The first of which, SCP-18751, is a steel table measuring 72 centimeters by 72 centimeters by 64 centimeters, with a standard 8x8 chessboard painted on top. Inside the steel box is a sophisticated piece of machinery that combines mechanical and biological elements. The movement of the pieces comes by way of magnets, with the moves themselves appearing to be decided by an analytical engine. Integrated into the analytical engine is brain tissue from the twin 14-year-old daughters of a Russian chess prodigy who went missing during the 19th century and were never found. The pieces, which have been designated SCP-18752, form a standard 32-piece chess set and are carved in an Oriental style. The pieces have magnetic bases, and the tops have been identified as being carved human bone and genetically matching the brain tissue in the machine. SCP-18753 is a small steam engine with variable speeds that is connected to the machine via a drive shaft. SCP-18754 is a suit of 18th century Gusoku-style samurai armor. The armor appears to have no actual connection to the machine, mechanical or otherwise, and it now seems as though the armor was merely a prop, though multiple Foundation researchers have reported feeling a sense of unease and anxiety after making eye contact with the suit's mask. SCP-1875 continues to be fully operational and even has adjustable difficulty levels depending on which speed the steam engine is set to. To test the chess-playing abilities of the machine, a D-Class personnel was seated at the machine across from the samurai, and moves that were decided by chess software were broadcast into the room. Games were played on each of the machine's 5 settings, and the chess software was used to measure SCP-1875's estimated rating on the ELO system, which is a method used to calculate the relative skill of players, with a higher number being better. At the first setting, the machine exhibited a chess-playing ability that would be rated in the 800 to 1000 range, which would be the equivalent of someone who knew how to move the pieces correctly, but otherwise was laughably bad. The second setting produced a result closer to 1200, which would put it firmly in the novice category. The third setting improved the automaton's ability to anywhere between a 1200 and 2500 rating, which meant that it could perform like an amateur all the way up to a master level. The fourth setting, though, was where the machine became truly incredible and operated above a 2500 ELO rating. At that level, it would play like a chess grandmaster, and sometimes operated at a level higher than any human has ever been recorded. The fifth and final setting was baffling, though. The machine would play erratically, sometimes at a level even higher than that measured on the fourth setting, but then in the next game would make nonsensical decisions or look like it was trying to lose, sometimes even making moves that were illegal. Multiple games were played at this setting, and the amount of illogical moves only increased. The pieces began to move faster and faster, and eventually they began to ram together until several were chipped. The testing was quickly halted after this, and further tests were suspended until a way to test without potentially damaging the pieces was found. Following this bizarre result, something even stranger happened. 5 minutes after the test, an email was received by all members of the SCP-1875 email distribution list. The message, which appeared to come from a research analyst involved with 1875 research, consisted only of a single image, which has been classified as it is suspected of
The classic you want with the spice you need.
having dangerous memetic properties. Multiple members of staff opened the email, leading them to unintentionally view the attached image, and soon after reported numerous symptoms. They would immediately begin feeling anxiety, followed by a headache and fever. 2 hours after viewing the image, they would begin feeling restless, unable to sleep, and hear auditory hallucinations. After 4 hours, visual hallucinations would begin as well. After 7 hours, while still awake, they'd be exhibiting less and less response to stimuli. After 11 hours, there would be only brief periods of lucidity, during which the afflicted person would appear to recover completely and immediately demand access to the computer on which they originally observed the image. After 12 hours, well, it only gets worse from there. SCP-1875 has been classified as Euclid, and the most important aspect of its containment is that it never comes within transmission range of a wireless data network of any kind. To help ensure this, the anomaly is kept contained within a Faraday cage at all times, and a network security expert is always on site. During testing, the steam engine's speed is only to be placed on one of the first 4 settings and never the 5th. This rule became necessary following a test at the 5th level, after which a laptop computer was introduced into the Faraday cage to see if new research material would be transferred onto the computer similar to how the mimetic image appeared. It seems, though, that the laptop used was somehow infected and spread its virus to the entirety of the site's computer networks. All electronic communications with the facility were strictly forbidden by the O5 Council itself, which shows just how dangerous this could be. No electronic communications of any kind would be allowed until it can be determined just how SCP-1875 is transmitting its extremely dangerous mimetic image, and how it can be prevented. In the future, should any staff come to unintentionally view or open an email that contains shachmate.exe, they are to immediately... What happened? No, I'm fine. Are we still recording? Yeah, no, I can take it from, Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single anomaly as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives. I think, I'm going to go lie down. Candace Hayes, we have thy confession. A witch as brave as you shall be burned at the stake. The crowd gathered in the small room bursts into a cheer as the judge hands down the sentence. The accused woman doesn't react, though. She looks neither scared nor afraid, but simply resigned to her fate. No time is to be wasted in carrying out the punishment that the judge has decreed. A pair of constables grab the woman by the arms and take her away. A mob follows along as the woman is led through the town, taunting and jeering, calling her a witch, a wife of Satan, and worse names. She doesn't seem affected by them, though. In fact, she looks as if she can't even see them. Her attention is focused solely on one mysterious woman who walks along with the crowd, and yet somehow seems disconnected, as if she isn't truly there either. The two women maintain eye contact as the constables keep pushing the condemned woman along. They lead the woman outside of town to a tall hill. The ropes binding the woman's hands are cut, and she has just a moment to rub her sore wrists before she is forced to the ground and lashed to a piece of wood as another group tosses the last logs onto a nearby pile. Once she is securely tied down, the constables step away, but then another man wearing a hood approaches. He carries a large club and without hesitation begins beating her legs. The woman's composure finally breaks, and she cries in pain from the cracking of her bones. The crowd only cheers louder at the screams from the witch. The beating has left the woman's legs mangled, but this is far from over. The woman, still strapped to the wood, is placed on the pyre, where she hangs like a scarecrow above the combustible material. The judge steps forward out of the screaming mob, carrying a torch. He loudly exclaims that for her crimes, she will be burned until dead. But the judge doesn't step forward. He instead announces that another will have the honor of lighting the flame. Another man steps out of the crowd and takes the torch from the judge. He walks towards the pyre and looks up at the woman. She is exhausted from the beating, but she lifts her head. She doesn't look at the man with the torch, though. She's looking past him, locking eyes with the mysterious woman who walked along with the crowd. The man looks angry, slighted that she won't even meet his eyes in this final moment. And without another moment's hesitation, he tosses the torch onto the pyre. The wood lights instantly, the tinder combusting and turning into a huge roaring fire. The crowd also erupts into even louder cries of celebration as the woman screams from inside the blaze. The man watches as the woman is lost behind the fire and the smoke, and eventually, her cries too are hidden behind the crackles and pops of the flames. He doesn't move until the fire has nearly burned itself out. Most of the crowd has left at this point, having gone back to their homes, content with the role they played in doing the Lord's work. As the constables pull a charred torso down from the wood and unceremoniously toss it over a steep side of the hill, the man finally turns and starts to walk away, a tear rolling down his cheek. The judge approaches and places a hand on the man's shoulder. There, the judge says, attempting to comfort the man. You'll find a new wife soon enough. Hundreds of people were accused of witchcraft in colonial America, and while it is likely that many were falsely accused, there is reason to believe that some were under the influence of, or were themselves, what we now describe as anomalies. And SCP-3998 is just such an example, better known as the Wicker Witch Lives. SCP-3998 is a human cadaver which dates from the late 17th century that is covered in fourth-degree burns and is missing its legs. There is also evidence of extensive blunt force trauma, but it is not known if the beating or the burning was the ultimate cause of death. At some point, the remains were collected and fastened into a scarecrow that is held together with wicker, nails, and wire. While a scarecrow fashioned from a cadaver is rather unconventional, what brought SCP-3998 to the SCP Foundation's attention were its other anomalous attributes. It constantly secretes a flammable liquid from its bones that primarily consists of ethanol and human fat, and every night between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., the corpse ignites. This fire doesn't cause any damage to the corpse, though, and it is unknown how it produces the flammable liquid or ignites. 3998 does not keep its flames to itself, though. It appears that the SCP targets those who have either killed or physically abused a romantic partner, causing them to catch fire as large quantities of boiling ethanol appear in their stomach. Their midsection will eventually melt and then explode, leading to amputation of the lower half of their body. The fire burns both incredibly hot and unnaturally fast, and is unable to be put out until SCP-3998 is extinguished. A number of historical documents related to the case have been discovered and made available to Foundation researchers that shed light on SCP-3998, including excerpts from a 17th century diary belonging to a woman who lived near where the cadaver was discovered. In the entries, the woman describes attending the wedding of her neighbors, Aidan and Candace Hayes, though Candace did not seem especially happy with the arrangement. Candace is characterized as someone who likes to keep to herself, and who does not conform to the era's idea of a good wife. As a result, it appears that she became the victim of abuse at the hand of her husband. The diarist hypothesizes that Candace has brought this fate upon herself due to her behavior, which may stem from her being under the hold of the devil. In other words, the neighbor believes that Candace is a witch. Others must have had the same suspicion, because we also have records of Candace's interview with a Judge William Stoughton, who questioned her about the accusations of consorting with evil spirits. That it was in any way evil. She told the judge that the rituals and magics she practiced were not inherently good or bad, and that anyone was capable of using the same tools. She went on to explain that she hated her husband, that she had been forced to marry him, and that he had been nothing but cruel and violent towards her. Candace also mentioned a name, Clovis, that the judge assumed to be the demon that she had made her cursed pact with. Candace appeared to offer no defense or excuses for her actions, and the judge sentenced her to die by burning at the stake, with her husband, Aidan, being the one to light the fire. The story of this witch trial was typical of the time, and that likely would have been the end of what we know about SCP-3998. But another historical document was located that has truly given a new perspective to this anomaly. A sealed letter found in the cellar of a home that is addressed to Candace, though it appears to have been written after her death. The letter is from her secret lover and describes how they collected Candace's burnt bones from the bottom of the hill before binding them together with wicker and wire. The letter then describes how Candace's husband has recently restocked his own home with gin, which is well known. But perhaps the best information we have about the origin of SCP-3998 comes from an obscure local tale that was passed down orally for years and eventually documented on an urban legend website. The legend tells of a woman who promised her soul to a she-devil who taught her magic, but also offered companionship. When her husband found out, he contacted the local authorities and had the woman arrested. She was tried, her legs were broken, and she was hung up like a scarecrow before being burned alive. Her body was dumped off the side of a mountain, but the she-devil collected her bones and gave her life again. The need for revenge burned in the woman's heart, so in the middle of the night, she doused herself in her husband's gin, set herself on fire once more, and fell upon him as he slept, burning him alive so he could suffer the way that she did. SCP-3998 is currently held in a secure holding locker in Site-34 that is fireproofed and vacuum-sealed to prevent it from igniting. Every morning at 9 a.m., 3998 and its locker are cleaned to remove the secretions of flammable liquid. D-Class personnel who have been convicted of domestic abuse crimes are to always be kept at the site to ensure that they are the targets of SCP-3998, which, when it's not allowed to ignite, will result in them only feeling mild discomfort in their head and chest rather than spontaneous combustion. Due to its relatively easy method of containment, SCP-3998 has been classified as safe. However, recent developments have caused the Foundation to rethink this classification. Despite 3998 being securely contained, the number of arson-related homicides in the state of Massachusetts have actually increased following containment, with many showing the same damage to their body as would be expected in a victim of SCP-3998. And while it may be that these are the result of a yet uncaught serial killer who simply happens to employ similar methods of killing their victims, a recent re-examination of the SCP-3998 corpse has revealed more troubling details. The body of SCP-3998 does not belong to Candace Hayes, and in fact appears to be a male who was in his 30s at the time of his death. Following these new revelations, reclassification of SCP-3998 to Euclid is pending. Whether SCP-3998 is the body of Candace's husband Aiden, forced to endure an eternal punishment of burning again each and every night, or if it's some other unfortunate victim of a violent and painful death, is unknown, as is the ultimate fate of Candace and Clovis. But with the deaths that would appear to be attributable to SCP-3998 showing no signs of stopping despite containment, it can only be assumed that the Wicker Witch lives. It's late on a Saturday night in New York City.